Well, hello everybody. So as promised, I've been meeting with each of you, and hopefully we'll continue to meet with each and every one of you to go over the materials that you have created for this forest management plan up to date. So by now, by the time of this recording, you should have created some stand maps, have gone out and used this document here to go out and do some preliminary inventory work. Okay, so that's all filled in, and then you summarize it. But what I've been working with you all is to make sure that you're summarizing this data correctly, to make sure that for whatever reason it may be that you've didn't do your stand maps correctly, which is completely understandable. If you're just heads up digitizing it, you don't really know what you've got until you get out into the field. And it may turn out that plot number one, which you thought was in stand number one, really more closely resembles the stand number two. So that allows you the opportunity to redraw your stand boundaries and then to group it in the appropriate stand summary table. Okay, so you're summarizing your information by by each stand here. And again, I've walked you through it, but if you're having trouble with that, then that's part of this whole process of working with you one-on-one. And so you were supposed to have turned that in by now. And if you haven't, get it done and get it to me. And then the other part of this is that was supposed to be turned in by now were these basic descriptions that of each stand that you did in silviculture last semester, and now you did that as a group, and now you're doing it on your own for each of your properties, okay, or for each of your stands. So what I asked you to do is to provide a narrative of the property that you're working on, and that's really, it's going to be an overall description of the property, the access to the property, what is the landowner, whatever history you could have added to it. So just a whole number of different things. And then I wanted you to provide the overall landowner objectives in a couple of sentences, and then describe more or less how you collected the data. Okay, so then you went on, preferably you would have a stand map at that point, and then you would go and do a description of each stand that you have. Okay, so I wanted you to do it based on what you were calling that particular stand, what natural community it seemed to match up best with, what stage of stand development you would expect it to be in based on your observations and the data, how big the stand is, and that's just approximate, doesn't have to be exact. I want you to give a description of the direction or the aspect, basically, what, kind of the land feature that property or that stand falls on, okay, and the elevational ranges. You can get that off of your topo maps, or you can pull it on the Google Earth if you want. That does that nice and fast for you. Approximate age of some of the trees that you've measured out there, and then approximate site index of some of the trees of interest. Okay, so if yellow poplar is a tree of interest out there for me, then I was going to get its site index, and then the growth rates. Okay, based on the growth rate tables that we've had you use. All right. So from that information, you should have been able to build a table that looks like this, and that's just essentially these tables right here, okay, just modified and pulled in. All right. From these tables, you could actually use these two pieces of information and the stocking charts for hardwoods to come up with what the actual stocking is. I'm expecting to see that in the descriptions of these soils, of these stands. But then you just below that table, you could put in a real brief description of the canopy species you see, a brief description, list of the understory species that you see. All right, and then you do a narrative of the timber that you see out there. Okay, so The stocking, that's where I pulled that from the stocking guides. All right. What I'm also doing is I'm describing this information. Basically, I'm interpreting this information. All right. So I don't just push those numbers out there. I actually describe what's going on with them. What do they mean? Okay. So talking about the growth rates, and the age classes and the growth rates. What does that mean in terms of land management, especially in terms of this guy's or gal's basic idea of what they want to do out there. So then to get into a little bit of description of the access. Pardon my misspelling on that. I'll fix that. And and then a description of how Mr. Fowler's, in this case, Mr. Fowler's objectives could be fulfilled in that particular stand. Okay, and then you go on to the next stand. All right. I've also suggested using photos to help describe what's going on. Okay, so that's where you should have been by now at this point in time. Just a real brief description. Okay, so what I'm doing now is when I'm meeting with everybody is I'm helping you to flesh this part out a little bit more. Okay, both parts, the overall description and the description of each individual stand. All right, so in order to do that, I'm going to pull up I've got a couple of examples that I'm going to load up for you. One is it's kind of the bare bones, what might be. Whoops, this one here. This is basically a PUV plan that I've done for folks. And so what I'm trying to do with you all is to just kind of get you up to speed with how different plans could be written. Formats could be a little bit different and stuff like that. I do have one that was from a student from last year. It got just about 100%. I don't think I took any points off of it because this person had covered everything completely. It was just a very, very good job. More complete than this one that we're looking at right now. Like I said, this is a PUV plan, so I don't really discuss wildlife as much on it as I would hope you all to do. I don't do any literature cited, which I am expecting you to do on your plan. But I do want to show you in terms of the actual descriptions of the stands, what you can do. Okay, and this serves as a good example of that. And perhaps even the formatting. Notice what I put right on my cover page is my locator map, and I give it a figure. Okay, so I'm letting folks know where is this thing in conjunction to either Lake, I think that's Hiwassee, or the town of Murphy. Okay, and I've tried to redact this as much as possible. So those of you who have met with me know that I was going a little bit more detailed in what is probably should be at the front end of this plan. The landowner names, their description. If you can get their PIN number, that's great. You can get that from the GIS. All you got to do is look their property up on the GIS, and it will give you the PIN number. Okay, and you could also just hold your cursor over the map on ArcGIS or in Google Earth, and you can switch the view so that it's showing you lat long coordinates. A lot of times people will put those in. If these plans are going to be used for present use, which a lot of them are, having that PIN number is pretty important because that allows the tax office to look that property up directly. Okay, the date that this was reported, and then prepared by whom. Okay, so here's my little blip in the front that I put in front of every PUV plan, and it's basically the warning that, it's not, I shouldn't say a warning, but it's why this present use value tax deferment is actually in place, what's the reasoning behind it, and what is expected of a landowner when they get into that plan. So Must be active. So this is just my little soapbox I get on. I'm not requiring you to put that in yours because I don't know if yours is a present use value plan or not. Okay. But this is kind of where you might want to think where you're going to be starting. Okay, the property overview, and that kind of is going back to that previous one. All right, that's this part in red. Okay, so let me get back to it. So take a look at what I'm writing in this thing. Okay, I'm giving the approximate acreage of the whole property, and it's a I talk about it in general terms. This particular property happened to be completely forested with no homes on it, not much other improvements. And then I give a description of how you would reach the place, and I always refer to my figures. Okay, this plan was written in conjunction with two other families, so I just happen to do this in conjunction with two other family plans. So I'm just kind of describing the overall project here. So I do give on figure one, I basically I gave on figure two, I showed the other two properties and gave the acreages of everything. I describe a little bit of history of what these people have done. They actually had a stewardship plan written some years back, and I used a lot of that information for this plan. So right now, I've to this point now, I've shown I've described three figures. Okay, well, where are these figures? Well, figure one was at the beginning, and this I just kind of lump my figures somewhere in the middle of it. Okay, so here's figure two. That's the parcel in conjunction with the other neighboring parcels. That's the parcel's topographic map. That's the parcel's soils, and I guess management units. I just kind of lumped management units on there as well. Yeah, so I got the three management units and the soils. So I'm kind of that alleviates the need for having to do just a separate aerial with stands. Okay, I prefer you to put all three. Yours have the aerial with the stands and all that good stuff. Okay, so I'm going to go back up. Just wanted you to see where I keep the maps. You can put them anywhere you want. They could be an appendix. They could be right up front, or they could be kind of in the middle like mine is. Figure three shows so the next thing I do is after I describe a little bit about the history of the stands and the history of the property, anything that you can glean from the landowner about what has been done on that property in the past, this is where you talk about it. Okay, and then then I start getting into an actual description of the stand itself. All right, so this is I'm talking about of the whole property, of all the stands in general. So I kind of describe what's the aspect, and of course I'm always pointing to my in this case my topographic map, and talk about the streams flowing. I think it's important that you talk about where those streams eventually go, what river system they're eventually going into. And I also think it's important to give the property elevational ranges of the whole property. Okay, so so the next thing I go into are the soils. Okay, and I mentioned that I give the map units in figure three. That's the soils map, and I describe the soils in general. But then, if you've done your work with the web soil survey, it actually has created this table for you. I got no problems with you just copying and pasting that table in there. Notice I didn't make that table. It's just a graphic that I copied and pasted from the PDF. All right, so this is the percent of the whole property. So it doesn't give me the percent by stand, but it lets me see which are the most dominant soils. Okay, and so I can talk about it from that standpoint and how many acres each comprises. So I actually talk about this in more detail. Okay, I get into greater descriptions about what does slope mean, okay, in terms of limitations. So I'm actually describing some of those important things that we see with these soils. You could borrow from this if you want. I mean, I don't have any problem with you using this information, just as long as it's pertinent to your tract, okay? Then I get into the 4 basic soil series groups that we're seeing in there, okay? So even though I got a whole bunch of soils listed here, there's one group. These are all Junaluska Brasstown. This is the Lennon North Cove, and then the North Cove Lannon. So I just kind of lumped those together. Snowbird, I think, I'm not sure, maybe it was so small. Yeah, I think Snowbird and then Stokoa. I don't think I described this because it was just some teeny little portion of the property. So you can see here's the different groups, and they're described. When it is something that's important about that particular soil, these ones can be extremely acidic, all right? So you want to be really careful about cutting those roads and then having them dump into streams and creeks, because you could actually destroy the aquatic life. So anyway, you can see how I get into detail for all of these. I think I've told you all in your descriptions, you know, give 1 or 2 sentences. You can get into more detail, as like I have in this, or you can keep it to 1 or 2 sentences. But soils must be addressed. Okay, so this is something that you're adding now to your original document that you've just created. I like to describe some of the timber markets that are out there. I think that's important. In this particular area, I had to kind of look up some of the markets around here. You already know what some of those markets are for some of the things that we have out here. Okay, some of the big mills that we've got. So we've got everything from chip mills to just regular old hardwood mills to you know, the come on, brain, Columbia. Okay, so this moves into the maps. Okay, and so the maps are pretty important, obviously, and then I get into the objectives. All right, so here I really do flesh out the objectives considerably. All right, so it's important that you do that. This is from what you've picked from the brains of the landowner. Now, I know you may have only had a couple of sentences, but you might want to think a little bit more now that you've kind of seen the property, and I'm addressing these almost in the same way as I would for a stewardship plan. All right. Now, even though this is just present use value, and this is really the only most important, are timber and soil and water. The tax office doesn't really care much about wildlife or aesthetics and recreation, but I've included those in there as well because I think it's important for the landowner, and in this case, it truly was. These people take a lot of pride in their land, so I want to, and they're avid hunters, so wanted to make sure that I was addressing those. So talk a little bit about the tracts in general for all the landowners. Okay, so in this case, I talk about how what were some of the more important things that you want to collect data on. All right, and then I give just kind of a brief description of each of the management units. Okay, so and again, you know, these were referred to on the original, you know, in these figures back here. Okay, so I don't see the actual citing of the figure, but it's in there somewhere. So describing these management units to an extent, you know, and what is probably perhaps the best one for doing any kind of timber harvesting or something like that. I think it's very important that you include definitions. If you want to just swipe this right off of my document, you are more than welcome to. But I think it's important that these basic descriptions are incorporated in every plan, so that the landowner doesn't read all this gobbledygook and all this terminology without having a good description of what that means. All right, so I'm expecting to see some definitions in there. And a little bit different from what you have is, I would say, inventory estimates and how many sample points were taken. You actually will have done this twice, right? By the time you get your volume data. So kind of think about it. You're going to actually have two sets of tables. One is going to be the ones that you've presented in your document, the one that you've already finished. And that's fine, just the way it is. Describe how many points was used to collect that, and you know, in each management unit, and what was actually collected on those. All right. So you did growth, you did site index, you did trees per acre, and you did a basal area and some general estimates of what went on out there. And then you're going to say, and then that was followed by a second inventory of so many points. And in that, you use the 10 BAF prism, and all you were getting from that were timber volumes for each point. Okay, and how many points per. And so those are summarized in table 2, probably. Okay, your first one would be in table 1, your second would be in table 2. This is slightly different from what I've had them do last year. So looking at last year's documents, don't let them confuse you, okay? You can, if you absolutely really want to, you can lump them together like this, okay? All right, so notice I've got, when I'm all done, I've got NBF per acre, right? And that's from the timber volume. But it will also, I will have had calculated basal area per acre and trees per acre, okay, for saw timber, and then cubic feet per acre, basal area, and trees per acre. And then based on some value that I've created in PlotHound, it comes up with a volume, or a value for it, okay? This one's missing a little bit of information. It has just about everything that yours has in it. It is missing the natural community. I still want that in there. And the other thing that's missing in here that I normally include, I'm surprised at myself it's not in there, but I usually will list in here the I would usually list in here the soil series. All right, and I just basically, all I do is I go to the soil maps right here, and so I would just list these 4 soil series that are found in Management Unit 4. I would list these 3 soil series that I saw in Management Unit 1. Okay, so they would just be listed in there. Okay, just so that's a reference. And then the metrics of the growing stock. Again, here's the non-timber. This is a little switched around a little bit differently from what you've got, but you can see basically I'm talking about what's in the understory, okay, and then predominantly mixed upland hardwoods are the timber itself. Describe the timber a little bit. I do talk about the soils, okay, even though they're listed there. It's important that you include that as part of the narrative. Okay, because that is used for making some of the descriptions of, reasoning behind doing certain management objectives out there. Okay, and some of you have already done that to a certain extent, which is very good. So anyway, the basal area, obviously, even though I've got numbers here, I describe what's going on. Remember, this is not written for your boss. This is written for a landowner to look at, and you want to describe what's going on their property, okay? So you need to be able to spell this information out, okay? Recommendations is the next thing. And well, let me back up just a little bit here, but I also talk about the growth of trees expressed, shows slow growth. I'm not just, I've got numbers in here. I got the growth rate right there. And you can write those out, but I just basically, I'm interpreting that data for the landowner, okay? So it's showing slow growth for them all. So the recommendations then is, by the time you're done, I'm expecting you to get to right about here for all the stands, all right? So I want to see the soils included in there. I want to see the timber volumes that you're going to be going out and collecting. So the next time we have a little sit-down chat, I want to be able to see all this information, okay? Because what I'm asking you to do is to build these things sequentially, All right, so I'm not trying to hit you really hard with doing everything and its brother right away. What I want you to be able to do is get to the point where you can get to this, where you're making your recommendations and there's sound recommendations. Okay, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So that's what I'm hoping to see from you all by next week or two. Okay, remember we only got 8 more weeks to go, and you guys are pumping along with this thing. I'm expecting in another week or so that you'll have pretty much all this information laid out. Okay, photos are excellent, and I'm describing the photos. Don't forget anything you put in the document, any figures, you need to reference them somewhere earlier. Okay, and I'm sure I have somewhere up in here. I've referenced figures 1 through 5, something like that. So if I haven't, then shame on me. More points off. But it is important to do that. Okay, and then I do the same for management 2, or management unit 2. I do the same for management unit 3, and do the same for management unit 4. Okay. Ultimately, when you're all finished, what you're going to have is this. Is that whole series of stand-by-stand detailed descriptions and recommendations to fulfill the management units. And when you're all done with that, when you get everything all finished, this is one of the last parts that you create on this document, and that's this timeline of events. All right. And so I'm going on a 20-year horizon. I think I've asked you to go a 10-year horizon on yours, but it's just simply what year. And the reason I went for a 20-year, and I would hope you would do the same too. The reason I'm going for a 20-year is because I want to be able to reassess some of the stuff that's going on 10 years down the road. Okay, so there's that one. All right. The other document that I wanted you to see and start thumbing through, because this person followed my rubric almost to a T. Okay, so what I'm expecting to see when you guys are finished, you will have a table of contents on it. Okay, there's that description, pretty much like I had in my more scaled down version. And this person took a slightly different tack. They put the landowner objectives as a series of bullets right up front, and that's fine. Okay, now this person, just so you all know, so you don't get confused, he actually did 6 management units. 2 were owned, and these people are relatives. 3 of the management units are on this person's track, and 3 of them are on this person's track. So don't let that confuse you when you're reading your way through. Okay, that was just how he had created this particular plan. The other thing that's a little different is when everything was all said and done, and when he finished the plan. Again, this is one of the last pieces that he put in the plan, but he put that schedule of activities right up front. Okay, you are more than welcome to do that. I usually stick mine in the appendix, but that's perfectly okay. So notice, again, this is more in line with what I'm asking you to do. I have you do a description of the forest management. I mean, this is the header for it, really. Description of forest management and the inventory process, okay? You've already written that stuff down, or you should have as you're writing this plan. And so this is just where that goes. This is part of that, all right? You don't have to get as verbose. He was talking about making maps in ArcGIS. You don't have to tell me all that kind of stuff, all right? Did a really, really good job describing what a management unit is, how you can describe different ways that we can describe stands. And so he's talking about, some of those things that we described in class. Just went on very, very detailed descriptions of everything, okay? Inventory plot sizes that were used. And again, I don't want you stealing out of this because I know this document up inside and out, and I don't want to see you stealing this person's descriptions, okay? You can use it as a guide, but man, I see anybody ripping this stuff out and pasting it in theirs, there's going to be trouble, okay? So you need to, make it your own document, All right. So stocking of the forest is an important resource. So just describing all this. A lot of this stuff could be handled in the in those in like in my plan. Uh, where'd my plan go? Oh, there we go. Where you have these definitions. Okay. Come on. Whoops. Went right by him. So under these definitions, okay, that's really, he's doing, in this plan, he's doing the equivalent of that, okay, describing some of these definitions, why it's important to be aware, and he's just trying to make this document as legible and as easy to interpret. So you can read through this and kind of tailor it to yours, but again, no stealing, all right? Ecological settings, this is a requirement in it, and this is just more fleshing out. Again, a lot of you might not be able to come up with exactly the ecological settings, but do the best you can. You know, if they're on a dry ridge, describe it as a dry ridge. If it's on a moist cove, describe that. Okay, it's only a couple of sentences, all right. If you do know, if you feel pretty confident that you know the natural community, go ahead and say it. Okay, that's perfectly okay. Here, he also went into describing the soils. Okay, so that's perfectly okay as well. So basically, did just what I did. Looks like he just copied that table right out of the Web Soil Survey. Okay, that's exactly the same information. And one thing I don't see in here, I probably dinged him a little bit on, was he did not label. He did not create a label for the soils, because I don't really know what this is. So down at the bottom, it should be saying Table 1, soil series found on the blah, 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 blah properties. Okay. Gets into terrain characteristics. Okay, just some... Again, if you use this as a guide and tailor it towards yours, you're going to be just fantastic with yours, okay? So notice that's pretty much, he's covered everything that I was asking you to cover in that basic description of the properties, all right? And then starts getting into a really brief description, and you don't have to go to this level. You could save this for the individual management units itself. You do want to describe that you've got in the, here, did describe that there are different management units out there, and you want to refer to your management unit map, but, and then this could be actually embedded down a little further where you start getting into, the actual descriptions, okay? So that could have been brought down here, all right? So you don't have to get as verbose as this. There are other things that I do want you to get involved to describe with this, though, and so that, again, all this information could have just been carried down a little bit further. But we do ask you to describe a little bit about what you think the wildlife habitat is out there. That's why I was having you jot down notes. All right, and he went into a lot of description about, he obviously is a white-tailed deer and turkey fan, right? And you don't have to get as this elaborate into it, but do describe, maybe they're into, maybe you think it's very good salamander habitat, all right, in certain areas. In other areas, it's probably really good white-tailed deer, it could be good grouse habitat or something. Okay, describe that. Right, looking for that, and then again, this could have actually been. He's given it its own section in here: topography, soil, and water resources. You could do it just like this. You could have addressed it up here a little bit further, where it was given the basic basic area descriptions. He's got terrain characteristics, so you can see he's got a little bit of redundancy in here. you don't need to be that thorough in your descriptions of it. All right, but you could create your own little section right down here, and then just not get as as elaborate with it as this fellow did. You do want to describe some of the things I want you to be looking for while you're out there are any kind of health and protection problems. You all are keenly aware of some of the non-native invasive species. I want you to be noting that while you're out there, while you're collecting your data. And so that information gets plugged in right here, okay? If you see any areas, especially along roads or something like that, where there may be some work that's needed, describe that as well in this section, okay? So this forest health and protection is very, very important. Again, if you could also describe roads and that kind of stuff in this area as well, okay? If you're doing any kind of future road building, you want to describe water quality protection based on any timber harvesting. That book that I've had you look at, okay, the great guide. I actually, when I do these things, I just post a link in there, and so that landowner now has a link to get to that document. I also do a link to the BMP's manual, just so that they to the pocket guide, okay. So this person went into huge details about invasive treatments and how you probably don't want to be near the creeks when you're doing it, or using the right types of chemicals by creeks, and then so just all kinds of stuff in terms of fire and everything else. So just went on and on and on, and in a good way. All right, I know it sounds like I'm making fun of him. I'm not. He just did an extremely thorough job. I'm very, very proud to see the work this fellow did. And then here's again, all that stuff I'm asking you about access and operability. All right, this is where you're going to be plugging that information into. So you can see this part here is a much more detailed version of what I'm looking for, and I'm hoping that when you get finished with your document, you will have all these sections addressed to some degree. Okay. Take note of the boundary line conditions. Were you able to find the boundary lines, or any recommendations you might have on it? Okay. And then here we go. All right. So then we have these detailed descriptions. See, went much more details on all of these things than I did in my little plan. Okay. You don't have to go as crazy with this, but it really, it's a very, very thorough job. Okay. Total basal area, total numbers of trees. I'm not expecting the quadratic mean stand diameter. Okay, you could just give me what you see as the average diameter. All right. He plugged this data in, I believe, into some Forest Service software that I'm not requiring you to do, and it spits out all these tables and stuff. So we're not going to worry about that too much. Stocking level is very important. Okay. Where did you get your information? If you do this, if you do put that chart in there, I only want to see it one time. I don't want to see it in there for every single stand. Okay, so you could even put that in a little bit further up where he was actually talking about stocking. Okay, so up here somewhere he was actually describing stocking of the stands. Jeez, it's way back here. But somewhere he actually describes some of that stuff, and you can put it up there. That way, it's described, and it's. But overall, that's not something that I think a landowner is particularly interested in seeing. Neither is this. But if you see it in there, this is all you're doing is you're saying this is the table that I used, and it's a very confusing table for somebody who's never used one. So I'm not sure I would even include it. Maybe stuff it somewhere in the appendix or something like that and refer to it. Again, another problem. He's got this chart in there, but there's no figure heading for it, and so which tells me he never did reference it anywhere. So that's a problem. Okay, you need to be very clear as to what's going on. And you do not need to get in all this level of detail. Okay, again, he does it for the white pine as well. But again, I'm just, if anything, this person erred in he didn't error at all, really. But, if there was any kind of error, it was in just how much time he put into this thing. He did an amazing amount of work, right? Recommended age and structure. Okay, just all kinds of good stuff in there. And so here's the, again, that would be the equivalent of the tables that I was just showing you, okay? So this is just comes from a different source. Understory description. Why I have you, when you go out for your second time, I want you to do 100, I think 300th acre plots, something like that, and get some understory description. That's what this is, okay? And you don't have to get into percentages or anything like that. I just want you to let me know what you see in the understory, what seems to be coming in, because that's what's gonna take off once they do any kind of overstory removal. So it's important that this is mentioned, okay? So the next thing is, of course, this is the part where I really want you all to be focusing a lot of your time on. So again, this is the management unit assessment and the recommendations. So this person went into great detail about that, and then he does it again, okay, for management area 2. And so you can see this, he just plugged away at this thing and just did an amazing job on it. I can't fault him for anything except maybe just some of his references. But I do want to get to the bottom of this thing. Come on. Whew. Okay, so then the appendix. Okay. So the appendix, again, he put his glossary of forestry terms down at the end. That's perfectly okay. Did board foot values. So again, you could just put yours in the actual document itself. I'm not looking for anything like this. But the literature cited is important, okay? One thing I did probably gig him on is the fact that the literature cited needs to be inset. So you would have Harper, Craig, blah, 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 blah. And then this second line should be inset about 5 spaces, okay? 4 or 5 spaces. So this seems to be a little bit backwards from that. So remember, now if you're having trouble doing the citation, I probably gave them a few points on that as well. But overall, this person just did an extraordinary job. Okay, so again, you don't have to make a 47-page document, right? But I'm expecting about 20 or 30 pages from everybody. So there's that. Let me just go over some of the other things that are on the web here for you. All right, so this will be posted. I'm going to be putting it in under the Forest Management Plan resources. It'll be down below here towards the bottom where it says, a couple of example forest management plans. But I do want you to see a couple of other things here really quick. Okay, so this is when you're actually going out to collect your data using PlotHound. I want you to bring these sheets as well, one sheet for each plot. Okay, so when you're plugging your stuff into PlotHound, I also want you writing this information down here. Why? What if PlotHound crashes and burns on you? You've got a hard copy of it, okay? The other part that's really important is I want you to do that 1/10 acre plot tally of the understory, okay? So I want everything that's like 4 inches or less to be listed in here and do a stem count, okay? That's all we're looking for is a stem count by species. And then the other thing is general observations of health, any invasive plants, any signs of past land use, soil erosion, disturbance, stream conditions, access road conditions. If you didn't do site index or growth trees, you need to do that as well, okay, on that point. I'm hoping that this is a real time killer. This stuff doesn't take all that long to do. that becomes a real time killer. So the coring the trees and everything else. So it shouldn't take you very long to do these points. All right, and if you're only doing 15 or 20 of them, you should be able to knock that out in one day. Okay. So there's that document that goes out with you when you do your inventory. Okay. The other thing I want you to be aware of here is there is a template. Okay. That you could follow, pretty much what that student last semester followed. So again, you can see everything's pretty much lined out exactly the way that student did it. So you could take your information once you start getting your document fleshed out in the ways I'm asking you to do it. You could start adding your information into here, okay, and just following this format. Okay, if you have questions about that, I am definitely willing to talk to you about it. And then the other thing is, two other things, is this is the literature cited examples, which I'm requiring all of you to have literature cited examples. Okay, and I want you to see, this is that description I was telling you about, the insetting. Okay, so if it's just one line, no big deal. I think there's probably, I probably should add websites to this as well. I don't see websites listed in here, so I'll go ahead and try to do that for you. And then the other thing I want you to see is my grading rubric. So this should be a checklist for you when you are developing your plan. All right. This is the actual form I'm going to be using. All right. Do you have a title page? All right. Is it in the proper format? Does it look good? Do you have a table of contents in it? Have you provided the landowner information and acreage? Okay. What are the general objectives of the landowner? Okay. What are the ecological settings? What are some of the wildlife habitat considerations? Site-specific land information, forest health and protection information, access and operability, boundary line conditions, and then the number of management units, and then each management unit in itself. I'm looking for this information, okay? And you have probably, by the time you are done doing your inventory, you should have all that. The only thing that you won't have primarily is this, okay? So this is what you're going to be working on in the last few weeks of the semester. So for as many management units you have, I will print out this many pages. I try not to write on your documents in case you want to turn them into somebody. So I write on this thing, and this is where I make my edits and my comments, okay? And then the other thing, do you have the schedule of activities in there, and then the appendix, and then what kind of maps do you have? And are they functional maps? Are they usable? Okay. So if you have these dinky little maps that are not usable, then I'm probably going to say, no, those aren't. Okay. So then you can see how much I'm giving you for each area there. Okay. So that's the format, the grammar and punctuation, which I think is misspelled. Is it? Looks like it is. Anyway, which is kind of interesting in itself. Okay, that's all fixed. Punctuation, content completeness, clarity of writing, and soundness of plan. Okay, because I put a lot of effort, I put a lot of work into your clarity, well, in your completeness, your clarity, and your soundness. Look how much that's worth. That's 15, and that's 3, and 4. That's 75% of your total plan is on its completeness, clarity, and soundness. So if you write like, you're writing to a 5th grade teacher, then your clarity is not going to be good. If you're not explaining things correctly or well, or using the proper terminology, that's what I'm talking about. Okay, that's the clarity of it. So anyway, that's pretty much it, and I will I'm hoping to help answer any other questions that you might have for this. And, I'm going to keep myself available, and I'm probably going to be setting up yet a second series of sit down and chat about them. Okay? All right. Y'all take care.